Sorry. Okay. I think we're there. Sorry, I was just a bit distracted. Okay, bingo. Sorry. So, okay. All right. So, well, what I was saying basically was just highlighting the value of what we're doing here in terms of its, you could say, universality, its relevance for everything that we do, and how anything that we're touching on in this particular study is never isolated from any aspects of our life, from any aspects of our living experience, from anything that goes on in the world. So it's really something that addresses, you could say, the key issue. And then also what we're doing here is in fact something that is dealing with the actual condition of the mind. And from the point of view of all of the Buddhist teaching, everything that we're doing in the Buddhist path is uncovering what is already there. So we're not, with the Buddhist teaching, introducing something new. We're simply just uncovering what was always there. And that's the beauty of the teaching, is that we're not cultivating anything. We're not operating from some presumption of a particular dogma or doctrine, but we're essentially just unveiling the sanity that was always there. So that's pretty much what I've said so far. Okay. And thank you for your patience. So, so the point that Kongtrul here makes is that, like I said, the Dharma is not creating something we don't already have. We naturally possess wisdom and Tsewa. Now, Tsewa is then the key topic here, and it is the warmth and the openness of the heart. But it also comes with being something that is innate and natural. It also comes with a clarity that is not tainted by any degree of confusion. And we call this wisdom. We can, to some extent, cultivate wisdom in that we can eliminate the conditions for confusion. But what we're uncovering is something that was always there. So in that sense, we possess, you could say, primordially, wisdom and Tsewa. And what we're doing with the path is really just removing impediments to this abiding natural condition, this enlightened mind. So Dzigar Kongtrul says, if we didn't innately possess wisdom and the tender heart, there would be no way for us to develop them. Wisdom and Tsewa are not like goods we can import. The Dharma is not an import system. Rather, it works by clearing away all that obscures our enlightened mind and its potential. Therefore, the principal method of the Dharma is to remove impediments. And this is such good news, that we're not constructing anything, we're not changing who we are. We could say we presently are not who we actually are. We're confused, stumbling in particular patterns, what we call karma and kleshas. And on the basis of these, then, we create this condition of samsara. But all along, the abiding innate nature remains untainted, fresh, unstained. And this abiding nature has the wonderful qualities of warmth, of love, of caring, that is unlimited in its natural condition by the confusion of our insecurity, our self-centering, and so forth. So there's something universally beautiful about what we're doing. And when we see this condition manifest in others, it rings a bell, or it reverberates with us. It's something that we recognize as being, say, the most beautiful thing there is. So in this world, there's nothing more beautiful really than love, selflessness, the qualities that come with this freedom. So Dzigar Kongtrul does something very skillful, and he says we should try to recall how Tsewa actually feels. So we should recall a time, and he says actually 5 times, that we actually felt this unconditional gratitude, somebody who was really good to us, and feeling how it felt to receive this, and actually stay with this. So this is nothing to do with anything intellectual. This is not something I can do in the context of this this presentation. This is entirely up to ourselves to actually feel it. To feel it. To feel it. Can't do it here. Well, maybe you can. You can multitask, but it's not something I can convey. It's something intimate, personal. And he says, do this 5 times in terms of on the occasions of receiving this kindness that makes us feel really soft, and also times that we gave it, moments that we were giving it and what it created. And that's where we can begin to intuit the dynamic of what we're talking about. So this is where we feel this, the entire, you could say, object of this investigation, this discussion, which is the open heart, the warm heart. Now, this is not in the book, but it actually made me remember something from the life of one of the great masters of the 19th and 20th century, Khenpo Palsang, also known as Khenpo Ngakchung, who was, there's still actually direct students of him that live, but of course the most famous student was Chatur Rinpoche, student of Khenpo Ngakchung. And Khenpo Ngakchung, he was a student of a great Dzogchen master called Lungtok Tenpa Nyima. And when, in his early days, when Khenpo Ngakchung was studying with Lungtok Tenpa Nyima, he talked about his guru, who was the famous Paltro Rinpoche. And so Khenpo Ngakchung's guru, he tells a story about one day together with Paltro Rinpoche. So this is an extract from this biography, which is called Wondrous Dance of Illusion. It says, so referring to Paltro Rinpoche, he says, one day he asked me, do you miss your mother? Not really, Lungtok replied. Then Paltro Rinpoche says, well, that's what happens when you don't meditate on compassion. Now go into that willow grove over there and meditate on knowing all beings to be your mother, remembering their kindness and so forth for 7 days, then come back, he said. So Lungtok then recounts, I then spent 7 days meditating on knowing all beings to be my mother, remembering their kindness and so forth, and a genuine loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta arose in my mind. I went before my Lama and relayed what had happened. That's it, explained Apu, meaning Paltro Rinpoche. If you meditate properly, it is the actual reality that will arise in your mind. That's what it takes. I've told you not to accept faith offerings in the past, but in this case, you should accept whatever you can get and go home and see your mother for a while, then come back. So faith offerings are what yogis, lamas, and so forth, who live without any means of sustenance, they receive from persons who simply just give. But it's always regarded as sort of a karmic hazard, because you accumulate a lot of karmic debts if you're not up to it. Actually, you will remember in words of my perfect teacher, Paltro Rinpoche, says you need the iron teeth of the development stage, meaning you need confidence in what you're doing. You need to be genuinely free of ego if you're receiving these kind of offerings that people, the faithful, give to you. But anyway, the point here is that Paltro Rinpoche basically telling Lungtok Tenpa Nyima, go back and spend time with your mother and bring along some provisions. And of course, the only source of provisions for Lungtok is these offerings. But the point is to take them and then go back to his mother and share them with his mother and spend some time with his mother. So when he's done that, then he can come back. So this is key. This is so much key. Okay, also from my own personal experience with my teachers, particularly I'm thinking of Tuku Pema Wangyal, who would so actually attend to my mother. I mean, this is not to say something about me having a fortunate condition, but Tuku Pema Wangyal, he would actually write postcards to my mother. He actually would make sure that I was looking after my mother when we were in retreat. You know, he would be insistent that we really keep contact with our parents. And when my mother came and visited a few times where I was living at the time in France, you know, she was treated like royalty by Tuku Pema Wangyal and Tuku Pema Wangyal's mother, Amala, and so forth. So right from the start, when we encounter the Buddhist teaching, we're informed of the importance of our mother, and because the mother is then, in principle at least, the source really of discovering this open heart, this tender heart, of feeling genuine tenderness. So when we invoke this open heart, this feeling, and like I said, we're talking about something very practical, to actually do it. You can't say that you don't understand what's going on here, because this is about feeling it. So we're not talking philosophy here. We think about sometimes we receive kindness, and we actually recognize that, and it does something to us. But when we're doing that, we're dwelling on something that happened in the past. Sure, but we're dwelling on the past in the present. So this open heart is not about what happened in the past, and it's about something that we're doing to ourselves right now. So what we are doing is essentially invoking and touching this tender heart. So talking about this, having this discussion is all very good, but what we're doing with this is experientially actually experiencing this. And it's on the basis of this experience then that we begin to have some trust. We're seeing it for real. And we also can feel how this is what enlivens us. We can see how this tenderness is the source of the deepest well-being. It's where we experience the best thing there is. Now, this we could do, and we might do it every once in a while, but what we would want to do as practitioners is not just do it once in a while, but actually stabilize it. It's not just something sporadic. We happen to be studying this book, then we do this for a while, then we forget about it. It's something that actually needs to be stabilized. You could say I know that the objective, the aspiration, the intention behind this work by Dzigar Kongtrul is that we actually make this something that's a stable experience. And if we do this, so much of our confusion, so much of our suffering, and so forth falls away. So the question we could ask ourselves is, why do we close the heart when it's more enjoyable for it to be open? We can see how we habitually actually will gravitate towards these narratives, where we very often regurgitate just themes that make us feel sad, and that closes the heart. So Rinpoche is saying, why would we want to deprive ourselves of this oxygen? Now, it's not that we're bad people as such. It's just that we have mental habits, and we're not conscious of these habits. So that's where we need something that remedies this situation of being mindless, of just allowing these mental habits to rule us. Rinpoche says, and actually, in a lot of this little presentation here, I'm going to be reading directly from the book, so you're getting a lot of direct quotations from Rinpoche. So he says, one of the most basic unhealthy habits is that we easily let our mind get disturbed. Since a disturbed mind is a poor atmosphere for tsewa, we need to create favorable conditions intentionally for our mind to be more clear and calm. It's amazing to see how different our mind can seem when it's relatively still. Getting to this state may involve sitting on a meditation cushion or going to a park bench during our lunch break. An effective method is to sit still, count 21 breaths, and then look into our heart. This will create a good atmosphere in our mind. If we do this regularly, we will become better at noticing when our mind is becoming disturbed and our heart is starting to shut down. Gradually, this will help change our habitual pattern of getting thrown off so easily. Then our self-imposed suffering of oxygen deprivation will become less inevitable. But this all has to begin with a clear intention to create a favorable state of mind. If we simply leave it to chance, the tendency to get disturbed again and again will win out. And this is where we should be a little bit on guard against a habit that we have, which is sometimes to say, this is what I feel. I really feel like this. Well, of course, we're always feeling things. The point really on the path is that it doesn't really matter what we feel. What we're doing is being proactive. So what we feel is kind of, we should be aware of what we're feeling, but we should be proactive in doing things that are actually constructive. So that's where it's all very good to be aware of what we're happening, but we shouldn't necessarily just say, this is how it is and I can't do anything about it. This is what I feel. Sorry, but it's rather uninteresting. What's really interesting is, what am I doing in order to create the right, you could say, conditions for this oxygen, for this openness of heart. That's interesting, because everything else would just be a reflection of the habitual patterns that inevitably all of us have. There's nothing really particularly interesting in that. It's rather predictable. And like I say, while we have to be completely conscious of it so that we're not governed by it, we also don't just leave it at that. So when we might find some time on the cushion and we might have some time on the park bench, we inevitably have to leave that, you could say, favorable situation, and we need to face situations that potentially could be disturbing, where we get distracted, where we get wound up, and so forth, where our heart might close. But there are ways to limit how disturbed we get. There's no need for us to actually forget or be unaware of Tsewa at any time. We could actually keep it with us. And Tsewa really is what is going to be guarding our sanity and what's going to be guarding our good health. It's going to be what guards our good mood. It's going to be what guards our clarity and our warmth. So to enable us to keep this Tsewa with us, this tenderness with us, we have two great protectors. There is what is called mindfulness, and mindfulness is that presence. It's that it's the knowing right now. It's knowing what's happening. It's not being distracted. So mindfulness. Vigilant introspection. That is the awareness that knows basically what's what and what is required. It's what understands. It's that condition of prajna. So one is what actually enables us to be present. And the other one is the intelligence that understands the value of this and understands what's going on. That's the smarts of it. So we can associate this somewhat tentatively, we can say it's associated with shamatha and vipassana. And it is, on one hand, just you could say, the sharpness of being fully present, and the other one is the intelligence that comes with that. And in there you have what we then have recognized in terms of what's of value. And it's also knowing where or what to proceed in terms of what we need to do. So these two, mindfulness and vigilant introspection, these, by the way, are two entire chapters in the Way of the Bodhisattva. And these are absolute, you could say, indispensable tools. They are the two great protectors of the practitioner. Denpa and Shishin in Tibetan. Mindfulness is Denpa, just means not being distracted, remembering, so to speak, being mindful. And the other is Shishin, is basically understanding and knowing what needs to be done. So mindfulness is keeping this close watch on ourselves. It doesn't have to be rigid. It certainly has nothing to do with anything judgmental, because it's actually not about thoughts. It's just not being carried away by thoughts. It's being fully present. Vigilant introspection might have some conceptual content, if we're at the beginning of the path at least, where it is then, you could say, our knowledge of the Dharma and recognizing, for example, how important Tsewa is and how important it is to be proactive in sustaining it. Dzigar Kongtrul says, mindfulness and vigilant introspection enable us to keep to our intentions and accomplish what we set out to do. Without them, none of the Buddhas ever would have attained enlightenment. Without them, we will not be able to avoid the many pitfalls of the modern world. We can develop these two faculties by continually self-reflecting and observing our heart honestly and objectively. So self-reflecting, if I'm not wrong, is a little bit of sort of a particular vocab of Dzigar Kongtrul, and it is this just awareness that we ordinarily actually fail. Particularly in the modern world, we are surprisingly lacking this ability to be self-reflecting. And it is something that is based on mindfulness and also honesty, simply just seeing what's happening with us. We could talk about the pitfalls of the modern world because that's where we live, but it will always have been the pitfalls. Lacking these two will always have been the cause of suffering, and having them is the cause of liberation. So this mindfulness and vigilant introspection. Sometimes vigilant introspection is translated as awareness. So we talk about mindfulness and awareness, but same thing. Dzigar Kongtrul says, when we fully appreciate sewa and clearly see how our happiness depends on it, then we will naturally be motivated to be vigilant about potential impediments to sewa. So understanding the value of sewa, then also we will naturally be inclined to look after it. Now, so we're looking at the impediments, the mind in crisis, and we have crises. So some of these crises are very real. We might lose a beloved, we might ourselves be terminally ill, we might lose all our money, the ground of our existence, things collapse, and so forth. These are legitimate crises. This is not easy. No one's saying it is. But there are also times when we almost define ourselves in terms of our various difficulties. It might be the first thing that when we meet a friend, then we sort of start blurting out what's all the difficulties that are happening. Oh, you won't believe this. I just had this happen to me, and so on. And so we very often make this sort of a key theme for ourselves. And it's surprising how often we actually just gravitate towards defining our life in terms of these dramas. And that's where we would almost sense that we would almost have a sense that our identity, our sense of grounding, the way that we actually hold on to, well, our ego out of insecurity, that is what makes us feel safe, that actually define ourselves as individuals who are undergoing these dramatic crises. So that's where you could say it has a frivolous component, that it's actually something artificial, and it's really something we do just out of insecurity. But we should then, at this point, then question ourselves, now that we're engaging a dimension of intelligent action, we should question ourselves to see if it's helpful to do that. Is that really going to be helpful? Is this closes this process, which inevitably very often has to do with conflicts and so forth, that actually make us close our heart, if this is something that really is helpful, that what actually we're with these crises is this something that possibly could diminish this thing that is so life-giving, the sewa, the oxygen. And Dzigar Kongtrul is saying that as far as it looks to him, it's very often that we just we're not relaxing. We're unnecessarily agitated, and on the basis of that, we fail to see how fortunate we are. And as a consequence, we are stirring things up. So we live in this drama zone, stirring things up, failing actually to see all the wealth that we have, our natural goodness, our basic goodness, the quality of our situation. The thing is, because we are habituated to stirring things up, being agitated and so forth, to actually appreciate our fortune requires that we depart from habitual ways of seeing things, and that requires an effort. This requires that we actually do things. Luckily, this is where the Buddhist teaching is so immensely skillful, because there's so many things that we can do. Just from making an offering on our shrine, just from offering a flower, just from offering a lamp or water or whatever, or perhaps thinking kindness and extending ourselves with kindness to others, or doing this radical act of sitting down and not doing anything and just following our breath, and actually short-circuiting the normal conceptual narratives. So all of these, they bring us about an awareness of the fortune that we have, the freedom that we have, the advantages that we have. And it brings about a sense that we are perfectly in a position to actually open up our heart to actually pursue what really matters. But this does require effort. Again, it doesn't help that we've just subscribed to this particular way of thinking and we have all the stuff and so forth, that we call ourselves Buddhists or whatever. Dzigar Kongtrul just says, my feeling is that we create many of these crises because we're unable to relax. We can't relax because we don't trust our good fortune. Something always seems wrong, so we have to keep stirring things up. Trusting our good fortune is easier said than done. It requires effort. So that's where we begin to shift our mentality. We're looking at the half full glass rather than the half empty, and looking at these fortunes, paying attention to that rather than our misfortunes. That's where we begin to feel enriched, and that's where we begin to relax. We begin to feel at ease. We begin to say, hey, I'm actually here, and I have the necessary sustenance, I have the necessary conditions. I could actually feel good about where I am. So if we do that, then we're not going to be trapped in the usual patterns of keeping ourselves busy in a neurotic way, that we need to sort of basically gloss over our insecurity and so forth through keeping ourselves busy. We might look as if we're being very effective, and according to what is it, Max Weber's the Protestant work ethic that sort of defines the Northern Europeans and people like some of the I think it was, he was also extending this to include the east coast of the US. I'm not entirely sure, but it was certainly the Northern Europeans. It was basically the Protestants versus the Catholics, and that's where the Protestants, they would sort of define validate their existence, justify their existence on the basis of remaining busy. But this, of course, is when it's driven just by a neurotic insecurity that basically perceives our existence in terms of what's lacking, then we're never going to be feeling enriched or at ease, and then we're gonna fail on what really matters. So if we could avoid getting trapped in this kind of neurotic busyness, then instead we will define ourselves as and more through and rely on Dzigar, tenderness. And when we have that, then there's this quality of resilience where so-called misfortunes, they can become blessings, because what misfortunes do is that they yank us out of a condition that we could fall into, and particularly then in the spiritual path, some sort of self-absorption, some rather narcissistic sense of just being, you could say, sufficient in ourselves. And that's where when the sort of the difficulties arrive, they actually sober us up. And that's where, if we can recognize that, the sobering quality of our misfortunes, then actually we see them as blessings. So the thing is also, the logic here is, if everything went our way, we'd have no motivation for altruism or enlightenment. So of course, this is also where sometimes you'll hear Tongsi Rinpoche talk about the Buddha's experience before he left the palace, where he discovered suffering as actually being the display of Manjushri. That this was the magical web of Manjushri that essentially invoked the necessary motivation for the Buddha to go beyond just the comfort of his situation in the palace. And that's what brought about then his further journey out towards enlightenment. Now, regarding the future, it's obvious we have no control. So that's, as far as the misfortunes that might happen, it's true. We have no control. But the thing is, there's one thing that will happen that will help us when difficulties occur, and that is if we have this resilient quality of the Dzigar, the warmth, the open heart, the resourceful heart, the compassionate heart. And as far as having that, it's not a question of just Either we have it or we don't. It's something that we cultivate. Again, it's something that we need to work on. So we presently, as far as ensuring the conditions for the future, we can secure ourselves through prioritizing the cultivation of the single thing that will help us, namely Dzigar. So we also, in our experience in our life, when we practice Dzigar, when we practice having an open heart, and even if we haven't been, you could say, consciously directing our attention to cultivating Dzigar, we will notice that when there were times when we were less, you could say, caught up in our neurosis, and we were more sort of naturally giving. And this is not just something that happened, back in the day when I was, blah, blah. It's something that happens every micro moment throughout the day. It happens every day. And there might just be moments when we are a little bit out of our self-absorption and just naturally warm. We also see how we receive warmth. It might be in the checkout. It might be in dealing with others. There might be a moment where we're just relaxed and easy. And as we give out warmth, then also the world actually reciprocates with a corresponding warmth. It's not exactly like we have an economy going and we can just sort of, we can say, okay, I'm going to give out some warmth because I need some warmth. It doesn't really work like that. But when there is this quality of openness and ease, then it is something that's also reflected in our encounter with the world around us. So Dzigar Kongtrul says, if you make the tender heart your highest priority, your mind will feel more and more at ease, more and more in harmony with the world. You will find that as you express more warmth towards others, they will express more warmth toward you. Your world will become an increasingly friendly place. As this happens, you trust that Dzigar is indeed a wish-fulfilling. As this happens, your trust that Dzigar is indeed a wish-fulfilling jewel will grow. Then you will find less reason to struggle and less reason to be anxious. So Rinpoche talks about how there are 4 ways we travel towards the future: from light to light, from light to dark, from dark to dark, from dark to light. In this case, we are traveling from light to light because, and this again sort of harks back to what we would say, the Dharma is good in the beginning, the middle, and the end. We're cultivating something that is light inside ourselves, and as we cultivate it, it continues to give more and more light. Essentially, we could compare it to a lamp that's, we classically would give the example that if we take out the vase or what covers the lamp, I think there's a quote from the Bible in that regard, I think. Anyway, of course, the light becomes manifest. So what we're doing is making manifest the light that was always there, increasing the visibility, the manifest quality of the light. The inevitable waves of suffering, when we have that, then this will only increase our bodhicitta. Of course, this we might say, I don't know if I can do that, and of course not, but it's something that we can see. It's something, and Rinpoche gives examples of that. This is something that is possible, and that's where difficult circumstances, it's something that actually it snaps us out of this, you could say, unconsciousness, and it makes us very sharp and constructive, creative. And on the basis of that, and knowing then Dzigar, knowing bodhicitta, these are circumstances that will increase this bodhicitta. We can apply ourselves and remain cheerful regardless. So this is the point that we're talking about, this resilience. So we can choose. So we can choose between applying ourselves and remain cheerful regardless, unconditionally. We can also not apply ourselves, and we can live in crisis and turbulence. And of course, it could be that we are to such an extent addicted, that we are so habituated that we almost are we are identified as such. We feel that we would be very uneasy, and this is actually applies at a very subtle level also. We we might actually make turbulence our ground. And as we begin to remedy this absence of turbulence might actually make us feel a little bit sort of ungrounded. But this is like any kind of addiction where we for a long time have been habituated to a particular toxic substance that does not at all help us, but it's what we've ended up being used to. But the thing is, when we're so involved with this turbulence, then we are actually unable to extract ourselves from that. We don't have the aerial perspective. We don't have the wider perspective that enables us to be creative about our circumstances. So this catches us, we're completely caught up in it. And so to actually begin to be creative about what would be helpful to, you could say, preempt difficulties in the future, to be creative about our future, is very difficult because we're so immersed in this turbulence. So being agitated, we remain unprepared for the realities of suffering, and we will suffer. There will be conditions that are very unpleasant for us. There's what we call the four great waves of suffering. There is birth, we've been there, but then there's old age, sickness, and death. These are sufferings inevitably. But if we have prepared ourselves, then we will have less suffering. And that's where it's imperative that we begin to prepare now. That's where turbulence is very unhelpful. Dzigar Kongtrul just says this whole approach ends up backfiring because a mind in constant crisis is not a hospitable environment for Dzigar. We may be distracting ourselves from our greater fears, but we're also distracting ourselves from our only reliable source of happiness. The remedy for this habit is to keep close watch on our mind, and if we see ourselves going toward the turbulence, to turn our attention in a more positive direction by cultivating trust in our good fortune. Doing so, we will have more opportunity to develop our tender heart, and we will be able to progress quickly. So on the basis of what we've discussed here, we understand the need for attending to Dzigar, understand Dzigar as something that's innate, and also understanding what it is that gets in the way and what we need to do in order to remedy this. So in order for us to be aware of what's happening in our mind, we need to have mindfulness and vigilant introspection. And on the basis of this, we can choose to be proactive in terms of addressing what it is that gets in the way, such as turbulence. So in doing this, we are continually touching on what inevitably leads us to greater freedom and enlightenment. So this is then about addressing, you could say, the impediments to Dzigar. We're then going to look at, in chapter 5, opening the injured heart. I think Rinpoche's teachings here are very clear. So there might not be a whole lot of questions, but if there are, you're very welcome to, at any given time, to just type in questions. Yeah. So at the beginning of this chapter, Dzigar Kongtrul says, another of the most common impediments to Dzigar is holding a grudge. If someone has caused you pain, it's challenging to keep your heart open to that person. Even worse, a grudge against one person or a few people can turn into a much bigger form of resentment, such as prejudice toward an entire group of people or animosity toward the whole entire human race. It's not uncommon for a few experiences of being hurt to block all flow of tenderness from a person's inherently warm heart. So that's where we shut down. It could be with just one person, or it could be in a context with communities or whatever. But the problem is we're actually cutting ourselves off from this sole source of our wealth and richness, this warm heart that is naturally our abiding innate condition. And as a result, then we suffer. When we shut down, our life becomes painful. So shutting down is another word for holding a grudge. It's where we've been annoyed with someone and we feel it's justified. We're going to be looking at this in great detail here. So even just a grudge towards one person will make us suffer at any given moment. It's not as if we're engaging in any kind of particularly intelligent way forward. It hampers our intelligence. It makes us suffer. So of course, if we have grudges towards a lot of people, you know, all those people over there, that whole camp, you know, and even some people deeply embittered about humanity, disillusioned about humanity and so forth, maybe even turning it into sort of a dogma or a crusade, then we have corresponding suffering. And sometimes these kind of people, they sort of bring other people in. And this is where we begin to have these tribes that sort of begin to, you could say, alienate each other. So when we have that, when we have this grudge, we're basically inflicting a wound on ourselves. And because we're going to be walking through life with this kind of this situation of just lacking tzivah, we're wounded persons. And it's like having a large open wound in a bustling crowd. Rinpoche compares it to if you're in an Indian train station, which is definitely where you have large bustling crowds, or you might go to a festival, a music festival, also bustling crowds, people, you know, getting together. And if you have a large open wound, you know, you're very, very vulnerable. And as a result, then what the point here is, as long as we have grudges, we will never have peace. So to let go, the first thing that we need to know is actually that we're not stuck with this hurt. It's not as if we're destined to have this hurt. We are suffering, and we might think there's nothing I can do about that. But this is the point here, is we're not stuck with this hurt. It's something that we're generating ourselves. It has nothing to do with the other person. It's not that there's the annoying person and we're the victim of this person. It's something that we're creating, and we're not destined to perpetuate this. So we have the choice to hold on habitually, or we have the choice to let go, which will give us oxygen. This is where we're beginning to be free from this and become creative. So Rinpoche is saying we should do whatever it might take to let go. And we need to keep in mind, we do not protect. Sometimes people say, oh yeah, I need to protect my heart. I shut down because I'm protecting my heart. And this is so common. This is one of these sort of assumptions that just, it's viral. It's gone viral, and it's been gone viral for a very long time. And it's really sad that this discourse really has such a grip on the population. The idea that we need to shut down because we're protecting our heart. It's the other way around. To shut down is what really is going to damage us. That is really what's going to traumatize us. That's really what's going to hold us, perpetuating suffering. And we can see how it persists year after year after year. So what we're doing is we're ruining the present and the future by reliving the past. And this is not the way of the wise. Here, we're not talking about anything that has to do with what you could say what's normal, because there's plenty of suffering out there. To suffer is normal, but we're talking about breaking away. We're talking about, if you like, rebellion. We do not necessarily need to abide by the flawed assumptions that is part of the discourse, the conversations in our culture. We're breaking away, and we're looking at what do the wise do. And wise people, there's not a lot of them. So when we're thinking about the wise thing to do, it's not necessarily that we should be taking counsel from people around us. We might actually have to look towards the Dharma. We might have to look, what do the sages do? What are they saying? And that's why we're studying the present book. But this is then the way of the wise, is not to do this, sort of go into this thing of shutting down. We should be aware, however, of our habitual patterns and how we stubbornly cling on and regurgitate these narratives about our hurt like a broken record. So our hearts, when they're stuck like this, then yes, we can't breathe the oxygen of tzivah. What we're proposing here is that we could do it. It's not about us going into therapy over a long time or doing things for a very extended period of time. It's something that is immediate. What Rinpoche started off talking about is actually beginning to connect with the feeling. So as we're looking at chapter 5, we've already actually in chapter 4 covered actually a place of having connected with something. And that's why we can't really approach this present study of training in tenderness just sort of once a week, sort of just logging on. We actually have to do the homework, which is feeling. We can't do this just as something, this is something that's just a cerebral exercise. Oh yeah, the guy's talking about Sewa, I don't know, maybe, you know. We're not talking about something as maybe, it's we have it, you know. The guy's talking about we have hands. Yeah, I don't know. Well, oh yes, I do have a hand, you know. It's like, this is something we can do. And we have it, and we're fortunate that we have experienced it. We have received sewa, we have given sewa, we have had children, we have given love to our children, we ourselves have received love from others, etc. It's something that's a living experience, and that's where we need to contrast this to this myth that is so prevalent about us closing down, bearing the validity of bearing a grudge. We could partly also be motivated by recognizing how this actually is very detrimental to the atmosphere and the happiness for others around us. So people, they can't relax if we are holding a grudge. It's very difficult for others to be close with us. And if we're angry and holding a grudge, also our children, they're sensitive to the energy. We might not be expressing anything. You know, we might be clever at hiding it. We might not even have the usual sort of gritted teeth of the passive-aggressive condition, but we might have it somewhere, and children are very sensitive to that. So that's where, while children are not, perhaps not, you could say, conceptually developed, they're very sensitive to the energy. And so this is something that we know, and those that are sensitive, they know. It is something that's felt. So Dzigar Kongtrul just says, on the balance, he says, on the other hand, overcoming our resentments and fully reclaiming our innate sewa, our birthright to feel love and tenderness toward all, brings tremendous benefit to others. In the present, those around us feel our warmth, which in turn induces their own sewa to flow. And in the long term, our tender heart is the seed of realizing our full potential to benefit others by attaining enlightenment. So temporarily, this heart of sewa is something that brings happiness, and ultimately it's something that will enable us to serve others in an ultimate sense. Okay. So I'm just going to take a little break here and just answer a few questions. Someone says, may I request to have your elegant slides for future review and refresh? Sure. Yeah, sure. What I'll do at the end of the course is I'll just save this as a PDF, so then you can look at it then, and remind me in case I don't do it. This is a valid question. Someone is saying, sorry if you've addressed this question. I'm still puzzled about the terminology Rinpoche has chosen. It seems to be fine to change sewa into bodhicitta in the context. What are the differences between sewa and bodhicitta? Thank you. Well, yes, they are being used synonymously here. And this is also something that was addressed in the Rinpoche last time, quoting the Madhyamika Avatara, where Chandrakirti, he basically uses sewa and nyingje interchangeably, meaning tenderness and compassion interchangeably, and identifies how these are then the cause for bodhicitta. So that's where you could say sewa in its initial stage is this warmth, but it develops into something far greater, which is then bodhicitta, and that's where we then, you could say, sewa that's infused with this, you could say, wider perspective of wisdom, then becomes bodhicitta. But yes, I think it's all right just for practical purposes to identify this soft, open heart of sewa with bodhicitta. Yeah, that is it, but you're right, it is being used interchangeably. Now, we may feel justified in feeling hurt. We may have very weighty reasons. We say, I didn't do anything to that person, and yet this person did all this to me. And you could say, well, that's, it's not as if, overall, because of course we could also think in terms of two people, pulling each other's hairs, they're retaliating, first one thing, the person hurts the other, and then the other person seeks to hurt the other back. But there might be something where just out of the blue, from no logical reason whatsoever, then somebody hurts us. There's no logic to it. And that's where the Dzigar Kongtrul says, but whoever these individuals are, and whatever they did, we have to keep in mind the bigger picture of what's at stake, our wish-fulfilling jewel of sewa. Sometimes it takes a lot of work to overcome resentment, but we're capable of doing that work as long as we're motivated. And we will be motivated as long as we understand there's no good alternative. So yes, for the time being, let's just leave it at that. Unjust things happen and we are hurt. But the thing is, shutting down, that's where we're letting go of the sole thing that really sustains us. So it's as if we have the medicine that would cure the hurt, and yet we throw it out in our sort of frustration. So that's where, as we experience hurt, then we should make sure that it's not something that then makes our heart close down. That's letting go of this wish-fulfilling jewel. And Rinpoche then gives examples of men and women who show us how to remain strong and cheerful in the face of being deeply wronged. And he brings as example His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela. But his point is also that while we can see how these people have actually been strong in the face of, you could say, injustice, it's also not as if they are aliens from another planet. It's not as if they're different. And that's where it's important that we don't think, oh yeah, well, that's Nelson Mandela, oh yeah, well, that's the Dalai Lama. The point here is they are not divine. We could have discussions, saying, gosh, Mother Teresa, she was amazing, or people that we know would say, wow, this is an amazing person. And we objectify them in a way that solidifies them as alien, as other. And that's a big mistake. Dzigar Kongtrul makes the point really that their strength, it's on the basis of their sewa. And that's something that all beings have. It's on the basis of their connection with its sewa. It's on the basis of a connection with something that we share with them. Now, obviously, these persons have, you could say, they have invested in, worked with, and make their sewa grow. That's a given. But the raw material we share. We have the same raw materials that they have. So this kind of sewa, we might say, well, that's not normal, It's just normal to retaliate. Yeah, so-and-so did this to you. You should retaliate, That's the normal thing to do. So we might say this kind of sewa, like that of Martin Luther King, well, that's Martin Luther King, Oh gosh, we could never do that. But that's the whole point. And everybody of these persons that we've just mentioned, they would agree on this, that perhaps it has an extraordinary capability of healing, but that does not mean that we should just step away from it and say, well, it's extraordinary. I couldn't do something extraordinary. Martin Luther King, the Dalai Lama, all of them, they would agree that this is something that we must do. So their message, why we admire them, is not because they're aliens, but because they actually touch on something that we innately know, innately have. That's why we go, to encounter these persons, and why we feel they're remarkable. It's because they're touching on something that we have within ourselves. It's not set free, but that's also why we feel so enriched by such individuals. So we could say, yeah, this kind of tsewa is extraordinary, it's not normal, which is true. But, and this is, by the way, the next two lines are pretty much on, that's my own point. But it is, you could say it's not normal, but that's also the reason why we have so much suffering in the world, because this lack of tsewa is rampant. Everybody's doing it. And that's why there's so much suffering. You could say, there's a lack of literacy. There's a lack of knowing how to actually purify the water and drink clean water. Everybody's ingesting dirty water, and they're having the corresponding cholera. So there's suffering in the world because we are ignoring this tsewa. And we can also see where, and this is not just, we're not talking, there's no politics in this. We're not saying in some nations or in some places. It's not geographical locations, but just in spaces that persons live, where there is tsewa, where it breathes as part of, you could say, the living culture, there is a corresponding less suffering. So this happens. There are spaces, places, people, moments, and so on, where there is tsewa and there's a corresponding less suffering. Anyway, Rinpoche says, the pain that a sage goes through will put him or her in touch with what is reliable. So when, for example, we have, of course, these narratives that go through people who've been through very difficult times, but particularly in recent time, then also some of the lamas that were put into concentration camps by the communists in Tibet flourished. There was, even though they didn't have all the, you could say, the structure of their traditional institutions, so much of the really essential teachings were transmitted. For example, I just mentioned Khenpo Ngakchong, Khenpo Ngaga, and some of his students. There was a great Khenpo called Khenpo Munsel, and also a great teacher called Ujin Chemchok. These lamas, they continued teaching what in effect was the Longchen Yingtig lineage of pith instructions, where they actually practiced the pith instructions of the Great Perfection under extremely difficult situations. And also remember the story of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's physician, Tenzin Chudrak, who lived in one of these camps where they, for example, had insufficient bedding, so they were freezing. And he, on the basis of that, actually developed the skill of holding the breath in a way so you could keep your warmth, and discovered Tumo. Incidentally, right now in Australia, there's a movie that's going around called Return to Gandhi Road. It's a story about a great Lama called Kangchen Rinpoche. Well, it's a story of somebody that meets Kangchen Rinpoche. But in there, or rather, I don't know if it's in the movie, but certainly one of the anecdotes about Kangchen Rinpoche is that he had a very tough stepdad that would chuck him outside at night and without anything. And that's where Kangchen Rinpoche is, sort of in the dead of the night of the Eastern Tibetan winter. To survive, he actually discovered how he could hold his breath and stay warm, and also there discovered Tumo, discovered, you could say, Kundalini. So the sage, and he would say, this is important also, it's not as if Kangchen Rinpoche says, yes, I showed the bastard that I was stronger than him. Rather, he always held this man with great reverence, because he says it's on the basis of his abuse that I actually was able to discover these secrets, which goes completely against the ordinary conventional way of thinking of things. But that is where Kangchen Rinpoche, then he would say, wow, thanks to him, I discovered these gifts. So what we're talking about here, and of course this is Dharma, this is something that is aligning ourselves with, might not necessarily be apparent. It is showing us the value of this unconditional quality of the open heart, which by its very nature is something that's not attached, it doesn't have strings attached. It's the very absence of expectation. It's the very absence of an agenda, and so forth. And when we have that, then whatever difficulties we might encounter, we are invincible. Mastering genuine tsewa, we become invincible. So Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche says, when it comes to forgiveness, how you identify yourself is crucial. If you identify yourself as an injured person, bound to your grudge, you will be stuck in that self-created prison. But that poor victim is not who you truly are. When your confusion is stripped away and your tsewa is allowed to flow freely and exuberantly, you will find in yourself the same courage and equanimity as the Dalai Lama or Dr. King. This is true for all of us, without exception, for the ability to forgive and move on is one of the many gifts of tsewa. Again, coming back to our limitations, which we need to do. We can't say, oh, Dzigar Kongtrul talked about the beauty of tsewa and left it at that. No. And that's in the Buddhist teaching, we come back to the hard reality of we have to be honest about our limitations. And that's where we work from. But we don't do this saying, okay, I'm stuck in my limitations. I can't get out of here. We're here from the point of view that we can do something about it. We have to recognize that sometimes, superficially, we might subscribe to this view that upholding a grudge might be satisfying. Yes, I'm going to get back to that person. I'm not going to let that person get away with it. We were hurt, and now I'm going to close my heart, and I'm going to let that other person feel what it's like to be suffering. And I'm going to hurt that person back just like they hurt me. I'm going to close my heart, and eventually they'll come and beg forgiveness. Rinpoche actually gives a very graphic description of this. So we might have that kind of plan in our mind, that design. So it might work. Actually, it might work that actually this person does exactly what we were. So we can sort of be pleased that they come back. But the thing is, whether it works or not, what we're doing is we're perpetuating, we're actually grinding that arrow deeper into our own wound. We're subscribing to that mind that is closed and angry. So we're not doing ourselves any favor. So manipulating a situation in which we're trying to sort of vindicate or gain satisfaction or whatever, or retaliate, revenge, and all of that is not helping us at all. So in depriving ourselves of the tsewa, which is something that could enrich our lives, we should ask the question is it not true that we end up without the peace and joy of tsewa? So taking away from ourselves tsewa, which could do so much for us, isn't it true that we don't have peace, we don't have joy? That's the questions that we need to ask when we're really down. Rinpoche says we should ask ourselves these questions sincerely in moments of dark despair. Well, that's not exactly verbatim what he says, but that's the implication. In these dark moments of the night, then we should ask these questions. What is the value actually of throwing out this tsewa? I could have a rich life. I could enjoy peace and joy. So stepping out of the emotions, when we actually begin to extract ourselves from these emotions, we begin to see clearer what is valuable. That's where this makes sense. Of course, we could engage in this thought in the sense that that's not going to do any good. I want to maintain my anger. I want to maintain this tsewa. I want to get back at these people. So that's where for us to actually appreciate this requires that we step out of the emotions, that we have a break, a little bit of a space where we can see more clearly. So Rinpoche says, how does it compare to watering the seed of tsewa and watching it grow and grow until you realize your potential to become a Buddha? Would you really prefer to collapse into your small, contracted self and its relatively minor concerns? Would you like to be the dominant habit? Would you like that to be the dominant habit of your mind and heart? So this is a very provocative subject. It's very touchy, and particularly if we feel that. So this is where we need to, this is not a dull conversation we're having here. There's nothing predictable about this. This is really sort of touching a nerve. So nevertheless, and this is what the nature of what we're doing presently is, we will inevitably conclude that a closed heart is unproductive and unhelpful. We need to see the larger picture. All beings, they equally wish for happiness. That also regards the people that maybe in some way or another have hurt us or have been the cause of our annoyance. So all of us, on the basis of, you could say, all of reality being this web of causes and conditions, circumstances change. Sometimes somebody is in a good space, sometimes they're in a bad space. But regardless, the basic core for everyone, wishing for happiness and having a core that is untainted with and you could say, possessing the Dzigar, that core is always unchanged. So there is no person that is entirely bad, or there's no person that is entirely against us. We're all shaped by changing conditions. So who is it that we want to blame? So Dzigar Kongtrul says, the object of our grudge is in fact quite innocent, like a child. He or she only wants to be happy from suffering, but unfortunately sabotages these desires out of ignorance. If we were under the same conditions, we would be acting in the same confused way. In fact, we ourselves, though we may be well educated in the Dharma, also can't help harming others from time to time because of our own conditions. No sentient being is exempt from wrongdoing, but no one is intrinsically bad either. This is how we can understand things when we're not blinded by our resentment. So there's nothing that's difficult to understand in this. Everybody, and that includes also somebody who annoys us or harms us, is innocent, like a child. And if we were in the same place, we could very well have done the same. Remember, once His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that as long as I'm still clinging to the self and still sustain the belief in a solid self, I could very well become somebody who does a lot of harm to others. So, what we're talking about here, results follow cause. This we know. Results don't just happen like that. They happen on the basis of cause. This is the Buddha's teaching. It's something we can verify. So, for example, if we've had little sleep, we feel lousy. If we drop a glass, it shatters. And with Dzigar, we experience joy. Without it, we experience pain. You can say this is empirical. This is verifiable. So, to think that it's just something that some people they got a lot of Dzigar and some people don't, to think that it's just the universe is sort of just was handed out like that, that's assuming that everything just happens randomly or that everything is just happening by chance. So Rinpoche says chance is just an illusion. We say that a roll of dice is random because there is no way for anyone to predict the outcome. But is it truly random? No. There are clearly causes leading to a result. There is no such thing in the universe as genuine randomness. Unless we're emotionally caught up, we usually know why people retaliate. The only wise thing to do is to let go and forgive. Otherwise, it goes on and on. So when we've done something and there's somebody who does something back at us, we usually know. We might actually get caught up in the game of then retaliating then. Well, the way you hurt me back was much worse than the way I hurt you, so I'm going to hurt you back. And then predictably, they're going to hurt us even more. And so on it goes. So that's endless. What Rinpoche is suggesting here, and this is a very real technique, he says, technique to open the heart towards those we are upset with. So that is where then Rinpoche gives a very concrete thing that we can actually concretely do. Hold on, just towards. So what we do, there's somebody we're upset with. So we bring forth a tender feeling for someone. We might think of our child. We might think of someone that we love. We bring forth a tender feeling, something real, something tangible. Again, this is nothing to do with our head. This has all to do with the heart. It's a felt experience that we invoke. Then you think of the person that you're annoyed with. You bring to mind the person you're upset with. And then, with a jolt, you transfer the tender feeling from the one you're feeling tender towards to that person that you're feeling upset about. There's nothing much to say about this except just to do it. Rinpoche then says, this abrupt shift can short-circuit your storyline and establish conditions in your mind to feel more open towards the object of your bitterness. Of course, this technique and any other will only work for those who really want to get rid of their grudges. I'll repeat the famous story many of you have heard about Atisha, who was going to Tibet and had heard that Tibetans were very easygoing, lovely people. And he said, that's no good. I'm not going to be able to have somebody that I get upset with. And without having somebody that makes me upset, I can't practice my bodhicitta. And so that's where he then found this obnoxious Bengali teawala. he then brought this teawala with him to Tibet. And of course, the story goes that that wasn't necessary. There were plenty of obnoxious, annoying people in Tibet. But anyway, that kind of commitment to this training and the appreciation for them, these that enable us to train our mind, basically meaning all those that annoy us, is really key to this, to the logic of what we're doing here in terms of training the mind. So we might feel justified in our grudge, thinking somebody really deserves it. And here again, for example, we might say somebody undeservedly was hurt by some terrible person. But then, this is where we need to actually extract ourselves a little bit from the limitations that very often is basic to the worldview as we have it in modernity. And that is, we need to reflect on karma, because we have, of course, a lot of causes and conditions that have resulted in things in this short life. But there are many causes that are not just, you could say, based on many conditions that are not linked to just this short life we've had. So that's where it is, for many reasons, this idea that we just came about sort of out of the blue, just out of some sort of unconscious brain and matter and the fetus and so on, all of a sudden we had a consciousness. That is a rather limited way. Of course, it's basic to what we're all taught within materialistic physics, but it's rather like believing in virgin birth to think that you could have consciousness just arising out of what is essentially unconscious. So that's definitely a leap of faith, but it's surprisingly rampant and prevalent. And that's where we need to, for several reasons, actually consider that might not be valid. And that's where we see beyond just the limitations of just this present life. And that's where also it leads us to understand that what really is coming into our experience and what shapes us right now is based on causes and conditions that extend beyond just this present life. So that's where we could very well see that we have a situation where somebody's clearly the culprit and somebody's a victim. But if we recognize that nothing happens uncaused and randomly, meaning then that it's not just that this happened in this life just out of the blue, it has something to do with also causes and conditions that extend back to previous lives. So that's where we need to acknowledge that at one point the roles were reversed, that the person who is the victim at that time was the culprit, and so on. So that's where we need to have a larger perspective that takes into consideration the perspective of our present life not being the only thing that has shaped who we are. Starts at 9:15. The point of reflecting on karma in this way is not to make ourselves feel guilty. Karma is not some form of divine punishment for our sins. There's no one in charge of this process. It's just how things naturally work. No one deserves pain and suffering. This is a very important point, actually. We sometimes have this when people talk about karma, that they think that there's some sort of like that the universe is doling out karma as some sort of punishment, and that's why people would get very upset unless they understand what karma is. In which case, there's no need to mention it. If somebody just says, well, that's your karma, mate, that would be very upsetting. And it would really just sound as if you're saying you deserved it because you're basically a bad person and you're being punished for your sins. Sorry, I'm interjecting a little bit of commentary here, but this is a really important point. So, reiterating, there's no one in charge of this process. It's just how things naturally work. No one deserves pain and suffering. But at the same time, our relationships don't just pop out of a void. If we don't understand or acknowledge how things actually function, our view of the world would be distorted. Every victim in this world has been a culprit. Every culprit a victim. Every prey has been a predator, and every predator a prey. This cyclic pattern in which we all cause and experience pain is known as samsara. The cause of samsara itself is ignorance of our true nature, which includes the true nature of our heart, seva. From this point of view, the entire point of the path to enlightenment is to gain the wisdom that will help ourselves and others go beyond this cycle. So this is we're going to leave it at this point here, in chapter 5. I don't think there's another one. Let me just see here. Oh yeah, one more. Yeah. So with the view of enlightenment, any hurt is an opportunity. So you could say what we just discussed here is you could say just the science of karma, just the way it works, and it has nothing to do with any, you could say, design or plan. It's just the nature of how our confused projection plays out in terms of cause and effect. But with a view of enlightenment, with us being on the path to enlightenment, seeing how what plays out is in fact just the result of particular actions, particular causes and conditions, to actually engage this on the path, this is where we would say any hurt is an opportunity. The Tibetans often would say, so they have a term called Dzigar, which means purification of evil. So you go through difficult times, and it's regarded as Dzigar. It's regarded as purification of your negative karma. So this is where we begin to see things, understanding the web of causes and conditions, the sort of the interrelated nature of all that appears. And this is where we begin to see things then with discerning, with wisdom, with prajna. And this also is where we say there is no intrinsic victim, there's no intrinsic culprit, simply just a display of causes and conditions. So talking about victim and culprit, Dzigar Kongtrul says, both of us have the wish-fulfilling jewel of the tender heart, which gives us the potential to attain the ultimate state of happiness. But both of us, perhaps to different degrees, have let go or have let our jewel go to waste because of our ignorance. Either we haven't recognized our seva, we haven't appreciated it, or we've failed to take advantage of it because we continually get swept away by our habits. So far, our impediments have gotten the best of us. That is why we keep hurting one another. But now we've encountered the Buddha's wisdom and skillful means, we can finally learn to open our heart to all, including those who have hurt us in this life. So, someone says, hearing about Kongtrul's outlook brought tears to their eyes. Yes, extraordinary, extraordinary life. And but of course, Kongtrul, his entire mission was teaching others the value of doing just this. Yeah, Kongtrul was never there as someone to be adored and worshipped. He was a teacher, and his life only serves the single purpose of actually enabling us to see the value of doing what he did. So then someone says, is it true that we might have done a lot of harm to others unconsciously, even we try to be kind and open-hearted? No, that's not true. All actions, we would say, since all phenomena are dependently arisen, since everything really exists on the basis of, you could say, our attitude, they dwell on what we call the pinpoint of attitude. If we have a kind and open-hearted motivation, then it can only create good causes. I mean, it can only be a cause for happiness. Of course, sometimes things are mixed up. We might sort of not really be aware of unconscious impulses and so forth. So that's where it's mixed. But I mean, if we have the intention to be kind and open-hearted, it will have a corresponding result. Of course, things are mixed up. So we might have done things unconsciously to others. But if there's at the beginning of these actions, before there was a kind and open-hearted attitude, then even though they might have been unskillful, they're never wasted. Of course, in the past, we might not have had the attitude of sewa and kind and open-heartedness, and there we might have hurt others, consciously or unconsciously. Yes, there we have, you could say, the karmic condition for future suffering. But again, we'd say there's never any suffering that's so bad that we can't purify it. So the question continues, we cannot change others' perception. What can we do? More prayer or more practice like confession? Yeah, there are all these, there are many things that we can do. So yes, we can't change others' perceptions, but we can be part of the solution through changing ourselves. So all the various practices that we do in the context of the Buddhist path, including putting aside our negative habits, this will be very helpful. And then someone says, thank you very much, I appreciate this. She says, this book is so clear, precise, and gentle. Thank you for presenting it to us. Yeah. Yeah, we're very fortunate, really. Yeah. It's a gem. Okay. So we'll conclude here. So next time, please read the rest of the chapter, and also the chapters 6 and 7, which are clinging to yourself, the root of all impediments, the fruit of tenderness, benefiting others. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Thank you.